Hi, everybody. I'm Zilla Blitz, and I am extraordinarily excited today to have Chris Helm and Seth Stigliano here today from Invicta Rex Games to talk about their new and upcoming game, Song for War Mediterranean. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thanks
Absolutely.
For having us.
And yeah, let's jump right in. Could you, for people who know nothing about the game, could you talk a little bit about Song for War Mediterranean and a little bit about gameplay and such?
Sure. Song for War Mediterranean Theater is something we've been working on for quite a few years now, sort of refining the game from its original origins. Actually, it's a World War II tabletop. It's set obviously in the Mediterranean theater of the war. So it's a 54-inch map, and when I say Mediterranean theater, I'm referring to really the top of the map kind of runs across southern Europe, all the way from Gibraltar, heading all the way through Greece. And then the Mediterranean Sea takes up, of course, the middle of the major map. And then across the bottom of the map, on the game board, you've got North Africa running, from Algiers, where Operation Torch started, much in the Mediterranean theater, running all the way to Alexandria. It's for 2 to 4 players, although it can be played in a solitaire mode. The players are, the core allied components of Great Britain and the United States, squared off against the primary Axis players of Italy and Germany. We've got 4 different scenarios and, a lot of permutations in terms of mechanics and setup like that, but that's the core of it.
Great, fantastic. And then what type of gamer do you imagine this will appeal to?
Well, it's interesting because we're just coming off the conference last week, and we've probably done, Seth, I don't know, well over 100 play tests by now, something along those lines, right? And
overall, sure.
Yeah, easily. So I think if you look at most of the folks who are most engaged in the game and probably get the most out of it, I'd say the profile is someone who, probably has a lot of different types of games on their shelf at home. This game, the scenarios can take anywhere from 2 hours to 2.5 hours in the short end, all the way up to sort of the main full scenario, right, of the theater being 7 hours. So if you've got like a TI on your shelf potentially, or a War of the Ring on your shelf, or going back a little bit, if you've got a Conquest of the Empire or Fortress America, or of course, if you've got an Axis and Allies on your shelf, you're probably going to find a lot of things that might be akin to our game. Play-wise, the folks that always raise their hand that really like it are, it's very open-ended. While it drops you in a piece in a time in history, the scenario, and puts you as 1 foot in history, from there, it's really just wide open sandbox in terms of how you want to, as a player, want to prosecute sort of, the war in that regard. So if you like open-ended games that can have some bizarre anti-historical endings, you're not reenacting history, you're kind of recreating or you're rewriting it, basically. So if you like that, it's fast-paced. I think, Mike, you mentioned in the past that it's, right out of the gate, you got to get moving and you got to get fighting and you got to sort of start play the game right out. So if you like fast-paced, and it's really designed to be collaborative. One of the things we came in with this was that the war wasn't fought nation by nation, right? When the Allies move and engage, the U.S. does not go, and then Great Britain. So we had to really work on figuring out a way to make this collaborative, in which every aspect of the game involved teamwork and co-strategizing and co-moving. So it's very collaborative. So if you like those kind of things, fast-paced, collaborative, variation, those types of games, then we think you'll like it.
I think one of the things I recall when playing the game is a little while ago, because this is we could talk about that too a little bit. This is the second iteration of Kickstarter coming up and things like that too. But I remember playing the earlier iteration of the game that you're not waiting around much. You're always involved and doing things as the gameplay goes. And that idea that the action starts right away. Some games have a slow build up, but right away in that first turn, I remember thinking, oh, wow, we're going. Here we go. We're invading Malta. It's turn 1.
Yeah, it's on. It's on. I mean, you kind of imagine it. We do drop you at a point in time, depending on your scenario. So imagine you're stepping right on the, right on the escalator of the Mediterranean battles going on, right? So you need to get moving pretty quickly. And in our intro, which we've done countless times now for a lot of these play tests, I tell the folks, this game kind of favors aggression. It doesn't favor taking your time.
You commented as we were talking here on Axis and Allies, and I'm going to be showing some screenshots here. That was a particular comment that occurred on the previous videos I made about the earlier edition of the game. Would you like to talk a little bit about that to people that look at this and say, this is Axis and Allies? Is that a justified comment, or what's different, or how would you talk about that?
No, it certainly isn't. I mean, you're talking to two guys here that, grew up playing that as well. So that certainly was in that, within our own history. But I would say, at first glance, to look at maybe some of the visuals or some of the graphics or some of the spaces, I think you'd see some similarities and kind of look. Because this is designed to be, a theater level, wide scale operation game, right? So fundamentally, if you're going to take the Mediterranean theater or whatever theater, you're going to break it up into spaces and countries and nations. So you're going to see some similarities, but that's really where it ends. I think we often hear the same time at the end of our playtest, this is entirely different than what I expected. I'm used to playing X whenever, Pacific Theater, Europe, whatever. And this is entirely different in terms of how it plays. The mechanics, the movement, the battles, the resupply, the use of strategy cards or, unit upgrades, and every unit has its own unique abilities inherent even before you do the upgrades. So there's lots of different, and the collaboration style of it, and the fact that our mechanics go by unit, they don't go by nation. So there's so many different things, I think, that lend sort of a lot of nuance and complexity. Real-time resupply. You take something on the map like they did in the war, you can resupply and put your forces anywhere you control. So it's got a lot of dynamism, I think, and depth that kind of make it very different, at least, distinct in terms of mechanics, I think, depth and choice especially.
Yeah, and that was the thing that struck me as I played it, that there's really a tremendous amount of depth, especially as you get into the unit upgrades and the technology. And just as you mentioned, all the different ways you can go with that too. It's the type of thing, you finish a game, you're like, okay, next time I really want to try mosquito bombers or something like that, or build up this other technology that's going to take you in a different direction. So I felt like that too kind of gets at the depth and replayability of the game. There's a lot of stuff there. And as you mentioned, just the varieties of paths you have for development, and then the hypothetical nature of it really left me feeling like this is a type of game that's going to have a ton of replayability, a ton of depth, and it's a lot deeper. Not that Axis and Allies is a marvelous game, but this is for someone I think wants something a lot deeper than Axis and Allies, to really dig into a lot more challenging and deeper decision-making matrix, if you would.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think we might get into complexity a little bit later, but the way Seth and I often describe it is this game is deep, but it's not necessarily complex, right? It requires a lot of decisions all the time, whether you're on the move as the attacker or whether you are trying to plan ahead because, or control ground because you are on the defending side. You're constantly, and we see people constantly standing by the table for the entire 4 hours, right? Pointing at it. This game requires you to really be kind of on the ball and think ahead, multiple decisions, make trade-offs, all that. Yeah, that's all true. I would agree.
And let's dig in a little bit then to that complexity element of the game, in terms of where does it fall? Where would you estimate? And I know now there's been some differences because this is kind of the second evolution of it, where we have 4 scenarios, and a couple of the earlier scenarios, the shorter scenarios, have there's features added in as you play more scenarios. So maybe we can cover those 2 bases at once if you'd like.
So I don't think necessarily it's any more complex necessarily than what you sort of played before as we went through the first round of this about a year ago or so. I think it still has a lot of its inherent traits of, you got to make a lot of decisions, and because the way the mechanics work, you have to think about how you want to move your units, for example, in staged ways, right? You don't move units in this game, and just like in the war, you don't move them in giant clumps. You've got to think about how you would layer these movements. So you've got to be 3 and 4 move steps, 3 or 4 steps ahead, in that way you're thinking and how you want to, engage the enemy. And keep in mind, you're doing this with your respective teammate all the time. So do you want to move your units together? Do you want to move them separately? If we're going to move them together, where are they going to go? And then should we follow? There's a lot of decisions all the time. And of course, anything with any decision, the key to this is the trade-off. And so we get a lot of, if I had just done X, or man, I wish I could do it again, because if I wouldn't have just moved that battleship over there and I would have given support, I could have won that, and I could have so we get a lot of that. So I think the complexity piece of this, I don't think it's any more complex than what you experienced. I'd say it's, on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know, 3, 4. It's not particularly complex, but it is deep in that you have to be thinking ahead and be thinking about all the time how things interplay. I mean, chess is one of the greatest games of all time, right? Everyone kind of knows where the pieces move, but the permutations and the decisions or trade-offs are really deep. So, so it's kind of in that vein, it's deep, but not necessarily overly complex, I think. And the scenario question you asked. So we started off the game with the 1942, you start off. Our first original scenario was you start off in November of 1942 when Operation Torch. The Allies made the big landing, and then they pushed across North Africa, and then they made their way up through Italy, right, and into to create that southern front. So that was our original scenario. That's the 42 start. It's still sort of the big full game, right, that you could spend a considerable chunk of your day playing. But we also did a little bit of a fast forward of Operation Torch, kind of an April 1943 start, and kind of fast forward the tape a little bit. So that gives folks the same feel of the big theater, but requires less time. It's more of a, depending on whether you play a tournament style timing, which we have rules, or whether you play open-ended rules. If you do open-ended, it's about, maybe a 4 to 5 hour affair. But what we've done in the last 12 months, in particular after the first Kickstarter, was try to think about if you've got 2 to 3 hours on a Friday night or something, or a Saturday afternoon, and you wanted to play the game, where could we find some really good smaller scenarios within the Mediterranean theater? And so we added the Allied invasion of Italy in 1943, which has some unique mechanics to it just for that scenario. And then we added the Battle for North Africa, which really starts when Rommel arrives in February of 1941. It also has its own unique mechanics. So there's 4 total scenarios running from anywhere from, if you got 2 to 2.5 hours to up to, say, 7 hours in your day.
Great. And then just to kind of recap, then the Italy scenario and the North Africa scenario are new for this edition. Right. And do they use there's a different map now too for those? Is that or
absolutely? So we've got so it's 54 inches, right? Seth, 54 inches.
So the whole big board is 54 by 31. The 2 individuals are half that. They're 34 by 27.
Right.
Okay. And they use the backside of the
exactly. So
right.
Exactly. Right. So you can take the big map, and you just sort of flip it over, and then you have your 2 halves, and you've got Italy over here, and you've got North Africa over there.
Fantastic. Great.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit. I know this is. I think we've been connecting about this game for over a year now, right? And so this might be a good time to ask a little bit about some of the challenges that you've had in terms of moving this forward in the design and things like that. And maybe this would be a good thing to give people a little bit of that backstory, because this is kind of the Phoenix Arises, if you would, which is got me really excited when I saw some of the social media tweets coming out a couple months ago or so. But
yeah,
talk a little bit about what have been some of the challenges in bringing this to reality, both in terms of the execution and then in terms of the design.
Sure. I mean, look, this is where we are, the classic story of putting the wheels on the car as you drive down the road, right? So if there is a pitfall that exists, we found it. But I would say from a design standpoint, it was a couple of challenges. First is, we didn't really want to make a game that was slow. We wanted a fast-paced game. We wanted a game where you had to be, as a player, involved at pretty much at all times. There's not going to be a time in which you have a significant amount of wait or downtime. So when you apply that to mechanics, right, you've got to really it's challenging to figure out where you trim all the fat, whether that's administrative tasks or whether that's things that suddenly, wow, that can really slow it down. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we keep that player engaged in the mechanics to do that, which could be challenging. We spent a lot of time trying to solve how does each unit, we've got 14 units in the game, right? Land, sea, and air. And as a standard unit, infantry, artillery, battleship, what you have, you fighter, we wanted to give each of those, some historically relevant, but some attributes, right? Some abilities, right? Whether that could be range, whether that could be sonar, whether that could be laying mines, whether that could be defense in a mountain space, whatever, right? And there's a lot of them. So we wanted to give each unit its strength and it's sort of like fastball in the game, because that adds a lot of depth. But then we wanted to give them some weaknesses too. So if they were matched up against a tougher unit, it's not, we wanted to give some variances. So the differences in a unit's firepower or its armor. And so making these units varied and unique, but also have an Achilles heel sometimes was really challenging but fun. And I'd say, the cards you referenced, we have a national support phase where you can play a strategy card, or you can recreate an event, or you can upgrade one of the units, say, a light bomber Germany to a Stuka, for example. We have these upgrades, and then we have these unique units, right? These sort of the B-17 bomber, right? Or a King George battleship for the UK. Those cards I had no idea how much time those cards would take, but essentially, it was, to this day, we're doing rinse and repeat, so that's a lot. And I'd say
that's speaking in terms of like balancing them, not making them too strong, not making them too weak, so you don't have that killer combination that's going to work all the time kind of thing.
Right, but that's exactly right. Balance, and then and you have them sort of offset each other so that you can have a little bit of that cat and mouse of, I play the logistics card because I want to move some units around the board more quickly, but turns out that the opponent has the counterintelligence card, and that allows me to fool some of your units and send them to places where you didn't think they wanted to go, right? So how do you create that dynamic of that cat and mouse to make the cards themselves and not just in isolation for you, but compared to your opponent? And the last one is, we didn't want any sort of like throwaway type cards, like little buff here or something. We wanted each card to be a tough decision, like, how do I pick it? And then so you go back and you say, man, I didn't choose that this time, but I really, so we wanted to create that pull. So that's the reason why the cards took a ton of time. The Kickstarter, we took a first pass at Kickstarter and didn't make the goal, right? I mean, that was a challenge, to be honest. It was about maybe about 15, 16 months ago. And, but I got to say, in retrospect, the feedback we received, the lessons we learned around manufacturing, the lessons we learned about just, shipping the game, pricing the game, the need for some new scenarios to appeal to different gamers. I mean, the intel we've received and where we've taken this has been, it was a blessing in disguise, but I wouldn't have believed that 16 months ago, but it really has been.
Right. Well, I think the thing that struck me with the first Kickstarter too, and we can touch on it maybe a little bit, was that I thought it did really well. It just had a tough goal with some of the production capacities and things like that. And do you want to talk a little bit about what are some of the changes then in this edition for people that might be familiar with the kind of the story of the first edition?
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, I'd say first off, the addition of the scenarios is really important. That not only gives you depth, you get, in terms of what you feel like playing and the variability of the play, but it also, depending on, frankly, how much time you've got, right? You want to spend a few hours and have all the depth, but also not, be there all night. Sure. Right. I think that was important. So the scenarios are a big point. I'd say we've made a lot of different enhancements in terms of the mechanics of the rules to free up some of the movement even further and build a lot of nuances, including additional unit upgrades that I think give it a lot of sort of depth and some interesting change. Another big change that we're doing is we're experimenting with the use of tournament style timing. So what I mean by that is, there is going to be, let's take Italy, for example. There's going to be a set time. It's going to be 3 hours. Each side is going to have about 90 minutes to work with across that 3 hours to execute everything that it does. In the Italy game, there are a series of stages, and you'll have about, for example, 22 and a half minutes per stage, right? You're going to have a little clock. And think of it as almost like speed chess, right? When you hit that clock, you're on the clock, and you are eating away at that time, right? And then so when you're done, you hit stop on that clock, and then the other side hits. So you're able to figure out how much time have I used, how much time do I have left, right? And then the more strategic you are, it's real time. The more strategic you are, the more time you have at the back end when it really matters, right? But if at that 3 hour mark, depending on who uses that time, that game is over, right?
Right.
And so and then if your opponent has some extra time left over, but you ran out, then the opponent can continue to execute some of the steps in the game because they're on the plus side of that time and you aren't. So, but then at 3 hours, it's over, and then we're sort of set some victory conditions. So we're experimenting with that. And I think that's we did it a little bit last week. And I mean, it's fast paced. It's fun. It's different because you don't have the luxury of time.
That's of course is an optional. You don't have to play that way.
It's an option. We're going to have that. And then we're going to call it open ended. You just want to sit down and take your time and strategize. Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, from playing the game earlier too, that was one of the things that I recall about gameplay is that, you're almost always engaged. There's always something going on. And there were a couple of times to remember, I think I got up, we played, I think it was on Tabletop Simulator early, and I got up and I got a drink or something. I went to the bathroom or something, and I came back. It's like, whoa, this is completely different. It's like a lot happened in between when I was gone. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes is like stuff is moving. And someone would say, we attacked here, we moved there and stuff like that. So it really had, I think, sometimes, and especially I think like strategic and high operational games can kind of, they have a certain, what's the right way to put it, kind of lackadaisical pace to them perhaps. But this had energy and pace. This is moving and things are going fast. And combine that again with that hypothetical nature and the variety of, you can go up through the Balkans, you can come up through Italy, you don't know. You've got the hidden fleets too, which is a huge element of I have no idea what's going to happen in terms of the game. And so there's just a lot of fun decisions that you're playing around with in your head too. So fantastic.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit. We alluded to it before when you mentioned it's a 2 to 4 player game and things like that. There's a lot of viewers on the channel that do specifically like solitaire games, and we say it can be played solitaire. Could we talk just a little bit about the capacity for the game for solitaire?
Sure. There is not a solo bot as such. And there are some fog war mechanics with hidden fleets and with just hidden unit boxes in the smaller scenarios. So there is some hidden information, but it's just a matter of having some alternate starts that modify some of the starting settings, and they are playable as single player scenarios.
Oh, okay. Are you going to have the alternate starts in there to accommodate those for solitaire players? Oh, yeah, fantastic. Okay. Because as I looked at it before, the one thing I had in my head it was the hidden fleets, how to handle those as a solitaire player. So if that's been addressed, because I had a lot of fun. I played it solitaire for one of the videos I made, and it was a lot of fun.
Did you?
I mean, yeah, you're flipping sides and thinking through different ways and stuff like that. So I thought it was an enjoyable experience, solitaire. And if the hidden fleet aspect has been addressed, I think flipping sides like that, I think a lot of people would really enjoy it solitaire. So that sounds great. We've kind of bounced around this topic a little bit in terms of talking about the depth and replayability aspect, but I'd like to ask, let's talk about that a little bit more in detail. What would you say to the player that looks at this game, say, am I going to play this game 2 or 3 times and I'm done with it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's something that that we always think about, because no one's ever a fan of that happening, right? You want to be able to play a game and you want to be able to have different shades of it that sort of bring you back a lot. So I think because of the open-ended design of this, there's, you like any game, you have to capture objectives, right? And there's a series of objectives and airfields and victory points lying all over this map, no matter which scenario you play. And so you can have a different combination of these objectives every single time in order to win the game. Now, it could be, sometimes we get some really unorthodox, weird historical scenarios in which, the Axis are winning by taking things that were never taken in real life, but created a whole different world, right? Sometimes people follow the path of history and win or lose. So there's so many different ways and sort of variations or permutations to win. I think that creates a lot. And then the mechanics themselves are designed to have replayability. By controlling different things on the board, you're going to resupply different places every single time. You're going to move your units to different places. You may change your strategy, right? There's a lot of open-endedness. And then when you consider that there's, when you consider there's 4 nations in 4 scenarios, right? You're able to say, well, we get a lot of, after a play test, a lot of this, I'd really want to do Great Britain again, because I feel like if I had another chance, I'd be able to do these 3 things. Or we get a lot of, I only saw it from Great Britain's eyes. I have no idea what it would like to be Italy, right? Fighting, right? Exactly. In North Africa. So I would like that. So when you think 4 nations, kind of the open-endedness of it, plus the 4 scenarios, it gives a lot of, and you make so many decisions in the game all the time and trade-offs that, you've got a whole new set of decisions next time to be thinking about or decide them differently. So I think that lends itself to a lot of different options, hopefully, for folks.
Yeah, and I have my answer to it based on what my experience playing with the two, in particular, just the pathway with the different unit upgrades. That feels like it's asymmetrical, but it's also, you're only going to have a couple of those in each game, and which ones you choose and which ones you get can completely change your strategy, because you could have a naval upgrade that really dictates, okay, I need to move and act in this particular way in this version of our alternate history. And then you can go Air Force the other way, and ground troops, and all of those they connect to different tactical decisions. And then you have the interplay between those decisions and what your opponent has chosen. If your opponent chooses the Stuka, okay, how am I going to counteract this? What am I going to do to try to stop them? And
you're going to change your entire resupply plan. If I'm the United States and I ended up having a unique unit, or I get the B-17 bomber, or I get, something specific, like the U.S. has a lot of fast transportation sort of upgrades, right? So to move your sea transports and your air transports further, faster, if I've got that and greater capacity on those transports, if I'm the U.S. and I get those, you can bet I'm going to be all about mobility and then supporting Great Britain by putting my units all over the board pretty quickly in order to do that. Now, how are you going to counter that as the Axis, right? So the cards are designed, again, a tough choice, and you're only going to play a handful throughout the game. And so, you could play a few games without seeing a lot of some of the coolest cards in the game. You're going to have to keep playing to see them.
Yeah. And so I think there is that kind of that multiplier factor. Not only have you got asymmetrical nations, but you've got unique development almost in each game. So I felt like as I played it, and I think I had a chance, I had the prototype for a couple weeks and then moved it on the first time. And we played once on Tabletop Simulator, but as I played it, like both of those games were very different. The nations developed very differently. And it felt to me like there was such a strong element of replayability that was inherent in the game. And then also just switching amongst the different nations. And now you've got 2 more scenarios. So I'm a little biased in my answer to that, but I think there's a ton of it there. So
that's okay. We'll take it. No problem.
Yeah. I had so much fun. I think this was a game that I'm a gamer that would like this game, right? Because I love alternate histories. And I feel like there's, history, yes, it went down one line. And I think in retrospect, we often think that was a deep channel. But I feel like the pathway that history took was very much a shallow channel. And what happens if you're the Allies and you decide to go up through the Balkans? You could do that in this game. And just the different technological advances and the pace at which they happen. It's kind of, again, that sandbox feel to it, which appeals to me. So I just had so much fun playing it. I'm excited that you guys are back. So
yeah, thank you. But us too, believe me.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what's going to be inside the box. And I understand now that there's going to be a couple of options, whereas before there was one option. Now there's going to be a couple of options. What's going to be in? As people open it up, what can they look forward to?
Right. So like you said, there'll be 2 offerings. We'll have the big box version, which will have the 2 original scenarios plus the 2 new scenarios, the 2 small quick play scenarios. And that will have the huge board, the 54 by 31 board, about 500 or so silkscreen wooden pieces, hidden fleet dials, about 24 dice, battle declaration markers, a bunch of tokens and whatnot. The smaller box will just have the 2 smaller scenarios, about 350 of the wooden silkscreen pieces, the battle declaration markers, about a dozen dice, hidden fleet markers, and just some random cardboard counter tokens and whatnot.
Fantastic. And the maps, so they're mounted maps again, I think, right?
They're all mounted maps. They'll all be double-sided. So you'll have in the big box, there'll be 2 6-fold boards. On one side will be all the Mediterranean. You flip them over on the one side will be Africa. Flip over the other side of the other board will be Italy.
Fantastic. Great. And did we talk about the cards in there too, in terms of?
I did not mention the cards. I totally forgot about the cards.
Because they're a big part. They're one of my favorite things. So we still forget that. I keep coming back to them. I'm sorry, but I just get all excited about those.
Yeah. No, there's 64 national support cards that will be in the big box game. They're not included in the smaller scenarios, just for game time and cost control and whatnot. But in the big game, they will be included.
Fantastic. Great. We've covered a lot of ground today, but one thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is, as you think about this game and as all the different play testing you've gone through, what are the most fun aspects of the game, in your opinion?
I love this question.
That's a great question.
I think, you get an interesting ride as a designer as you watch people play your game, and just like I said, we just came off the Origins conference in Columbus just last week. We had a lot of people come through, first timers and a couple of, repeat players in the process. And, I think one of the most fun aspects of it is that it requires collaboration and teaming. I mean, people are constantly taking little sidebars 5 to 10 feet from the table to think about how are we going to, depending on what the Allies do here, how are we going to counterpunch? And let's hope they don't see that they're actually open at this particular objective. And if we use an air transport, we can get it. So the collaborative, sort of secretive, sort of conspiring nature that's going on about how you want to work together, I think makes this a ton of fun because, it sort of recreates the teaming and, of the collaboration going on in the war. But it just, for me and for Seth, I know for you and for the folks that play, you don't know each other, but you become quick friends as you try to figure this out, right? So that's a ton of fun to conspire together. And I think, and mechanics wise, I think there's a couple of really fun things about it, you mentioned the hidden fleets. People really like those because for example, when the Allies, invaded the Mediterranean in Operation Torch, Hitler and the Axis forces were very worried. They had several options. They didn't know where the Allies were going to come, right? So we don't want to create a game where they're going to come either, right? You've got to recreate that tension, that worry, that excitement, and it's up to the Allies, unless that hidden fleet is found through some of the mechanics in the game and the units capable of the Allies can choose to reveal that hidden fleet at any time they want. So that hammer can drop at any time, right? And so that's a stress point, but that creates a ton of fun for both sides to try to figure that out. And we included a fog of war mechanic within Italy too, because, not only are the Allied fleets of Great Britain and the US going to be hidden in that regard, but, what the Axis did in Italy is they kept a lot of forces sort of in mainland, sort of like, reserve, sort of for quick mobility right. And once the Allies picked their spots, then the Germans mobilized, right? So we created a fog of war component in Italy so that now the Axis can play that game. They can have forces in these sort of reserve hidden boxes, and it's very stressful for the Allies. Mm-hmm. So I think the fog of war and the hidden fleet's a big component. We get a lot of, once people turn the corner on the movement mechanics, because we don't move by nation, we move by unit, because that's how the war was fought, right? You don't, right? You would send your fighters first or your subs first as escorts or scouts, right? Then you send in your bombers, right, to soften up, right, where you want to go, right? And then you do your bombards from your ships and your capital ships, at which point then, right, you land your transports, right? And then the invasion comes on the ground. So we get a lot of folks that say it's a little different, but as soon as they turn the corner on that mechanic, on how to sort of stage that and combine forces, it's got a very, standing at the table and, standing and observing the pieces on the big board, to really command your forces. People tend to really think that's a lot of fun, and I agree.
Yeah. Seth, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with all the points Chris made. Those are all great aspects. I think for me though, the greatest fun is just the decision space overall. On any given turn, like just the options that you can do. It's not a function of like, oh, they attacked me here, so I guess I'll attack them back here. It's oh, well, I can get these guys on this transport, move them over here, and then 2 steps later I can go take this objective and do this and do that and the other thing, and then it's a whole different war. So it's always an interesting puzzle to kind of think through and of like, well, what else could I do other than just the obvious? I'll do this. So that to me has always been the most interesting aspect.
And Seth, one thing you just triggered something else in my mind too is. And Mike, we get this all the time, is because we have, the map is big, physically big, but the movement that we created because of the movement steps, faster, lighter units move multiple times. Heavier, slower units with bigger firepower move less. But the way we created the movement steps is you can be across this board fast. Right. And so, you really can never leave your flank open, and sort of, you've got to be very, very thoughtful about how you do this, but that creates a ton of options on the board, but it also results in what we found to be some really interesting, wild swings, because no matter how grim it looks, we've played this enough times to know people will say, oh, should we call it now? And we say, trust me, don't. Right. And it's like, you would be amazed at the comebacks. We played 3 games of Italy at Origins, and by luck or by design or a combination of both, each 3 to 4 hours of pop, and each time we played it came down to the last movement step, the last point, and in fact came down to the last couple of rolls to decide. Oh, wow. Yeah. When it happened once, we thought, wow, that was lucky. Then it happened 3 times. We're like, well, maybe there's something to this. So we were pretty excited about the wild swings and the back and forth. I mean, it's not overly so, right? It's still fair. It's based on your decisions, right? It's your decisions that create it. But you rarely never feel out of it, and you can come back and pull out a narrow victory. That's folks were yelling and screaming and rolling dice, and it was a blast.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the aspects of that too, from like when I remember playing, is that you can't cover every place, and where you're going to put in, and by creating a strength in one area, you've created a weakness in another area. Exactly. And I think for me, one of the reasons why I really like the game is that, and kind of Seth, you've got at it in terms of. And I think there's a second element to it, is the decision space. Like a lot of people play games because they want to make fun and interesting and challenging decisions. That's the reason why a lot of people like games. And I think in particular, people who like strategy games and war games and historical games, they like that matrix of decisions, of possibilities. And that's one of the things I think really resonated with me with the game. But I think there's a second part of it too, for me anyway, is that it rewards creativity. And it rewards that kind of, because I think when we played one of the 2 games we played, I forget quite what happened, but I think maybe Seth, I think you had left like an opening in the Balkans or something like that. And I did the math and it was like, I can get there in force. And I think we kind of half committed to Italy, to going up through like the foot of Italy and stuff like that. It's like, we can go through the Balkans, you know, and we did it and we shifted and it didn't work. You beat it back and you knocked it off and stuff like that, but it shifted everything.
It was a great idea.
Yeah, and it was like, it almost worked. It almost
exactly. It almost worked.
It almost worked. Yeah.
So that happens all the time. You got to that's part of the decision is you can't be everywhere, but you better have something in case they hit you where you ain't. You know what I mean? Yeah. We were playing.
I think Chris might have been you and I playing together, and we were going up through the boot of Italy, and it's like, wait a second, look, the Balkans are open. We can go that way now. Yeah. And we went that way, and we got beat back, and it didn't work. But it was like you had to shift based on what everybody was doing. It was this really fun decision matrix. I really enjoyed the time that I had with the game. I think. Well, I think that's everything that I was hoping to ask and talk about. Thank you so much for your time today. But there's one thing left that I would like to ask about. This is something that people always ask about too. I realize there's some ambiguity in terms of we've got crowdfunding to talk about and stuff like that too. But what would be like the ideal pathway in terms of when players might be able to have this on their tables and enjoy this game?
So, like you said, ambiguous is the key term, but the current plan is late fall to relaunch Kickstarter. If all goes well, year later, fall of 2025, they could have the game in their possession.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, I am confident in this one too. I think it's going to be a very successful one. I'm just kind of talking and hear you guys all the work and refinements and options in the crowdfunding too. I think people are really going to like this one too. So
thank you
so much for your time today and for talking about Song for War Mediterranean. I'm very excited for this game, and I'll put information down below in the video description to the crowdfunding and various links as they become available too. So thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having us.